Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Robbins from Dublin City University. Let me introduce our guest speaker. I'm wondering, is there anyone in the ISPIM community or anyone in our field who has not read and been impressed by the work of Professor Oliver Gassmann? It is a great honor for me to introduce him. He is a man whose work has added light, excitement, insight, and rigor to our discipline. Oliver has written over 400 articles, papers, and chapters with almost 25,000 citations of his work. And this work has shaped and influenced the development of the field that we all love. His book, The Business Model Navigator, was called a sensation by the Financial Times and quickly became one by becoming an international bestseller, translated in many languages, including, as he told me yesterday, Russian, Chinese, and Hebrew. He has been a research fellow at Berkeley and at Stanford and at Harvard. He's the most cited researcher in the field of R&D management worldwide. And today, Oliver is going to talk about how business models can help when innovating in a time of crisis. So over to you, Oliver.
Thanks very much, Peter, for the very nice words, and hello to everybody. Great that you're here. I was asked to talk about COVID a bit in a time when actually everything was at the beginning and the start. It was the early February. We thought there might be coming something and it might change quite a lot. And at the moment, everybody has been like overruled with it, and I will try to jump a bit over the more general parts of it and try to give you a bit of an overview. How did it change the world and innovation? I think overall, I have much more questions than answers. Stuff what we know is like the size of this coronavirus. Maybe you haven't known that one. It's a 65 to 125 nanometers. We know a lot of stuff of data, but I think a lot is actually not really relevant. It seems to be like the 15 minutes fame, as Andy Warhol called it, of the epidemiologists, and it seems like it's overruling everything. In fact, the human disaster is really big. We have 6.8 million cases, just state of yesterday evening, in 188 countries, and we have too many deaths also from it. I will talk less about the situation in the health issues, but actually more what does it mean to innovation when societies have been actually dramatically impacted. In Switzerland, we had the first mobilization of the army since the Second World War. I think we never got, or a few countries have experienced what it is like a shock of 9/11 or a grounding of the national airline. Stuff like that stays in the collective memory, and we don't know what this means and what this will have an impact on the lack of the psychological safety. How risk-oriented, which is a crucial, essential prerequisite for innovation, do we actually be in the future? After we have happened and stuff like that happens, that we have the strongest reduction of the stock market, the shortest actually in the shortest time ever. It was stronger actually than the Black Monday in 1987. This was stronger than the burst of the dot-com bubble in 2000, the financial crisis in 2008, and the Euro crisis in 2011. I think the burst is quite crucial, and maybe the side effects of the whole interventions and lockdowns have been a bit underestimated. Right now, we think for a lot of countries, it's already the time to get into a transition after the lockdown. But if we look to countries which had experienced that all, and I look right now to China, in which went back to normal actually already in February, and which has something like the economists described as the 90% economy, which means, yes, factories are working already, streets are still empty, consumption is actually going down by 30%, hotel nights have been reduced by nearly 40%, and the number of bankrupts tripled compared to the time before. So a 90% economy is, after lockdown, already something where everybody is looking forward to be in the office again, to be in the factory, to see actually everything is working again. But de facto, actually, a 90% economy means a 10% reduction. If we would have a 10% reduction of the GDP in the US, that would be the strongest economical downturn since the Second World War, just to give us a little bit of an impression. And the situation at the moment is absolutely severe. So if you think of the public debts, the national debts worldwide, we have at the moment, the last 10 years, we increased the public debts, the state debts, by 4 times. So it means like what we did build up in 100 years, in the last 10 years actually, we multiplied it by 4. And this is not a sustainable situation. So I think we might get still some serious challenges. And what does that all mean for innovation? Because innovation is dependent on organizational slack, on a bit, the opposite of the pure lean essential management reduction to the minimum. It means actually that we have actually some slack time in between. And I think everybody who has worked the last 3 months, also via Zoom, WebEx, MS Teams, and I think we all got a little bit locked in that platforms. At the beginning, it was quite an excitement. It works much better than we thought it works. But then again, all the meetings became very efficient, very focused, and all the informal chat actually was missing. I think that is something where we have to realize that will impact quite a lot. We have also school closures. At the top of it, we had a school closure which affected actually 1.6 billion learners. 91% of total enrolled learners in 191 countrywide closures happened. That was actually at the peak of the end of April. And the beginning was like a bit of a negative side. Yes, will that be a lost generation where education is missing? I have 3 teenagers. One actually just finalized the Abitur, Matura in Switzerland. And it's a prerequisite to go to the university. There was even the question, will they actually still have it? And a lot was a bit challenged, but overall it worked pretty smoothly, and it became one of the biggest digitalization acceleration in education. And I think all the professional colleagues also realized that in the beginning, only a few had been really working with blended learning. Many of us had been a bit scared of really doing the first step. And after we had to do it, I remember in February when we just shut down from one day to the other, I had a MBA, executive MBA week, and the whole week executive MBA purely on Zoom. While we know there's a high level of infotainment which needs to get mixed in between to get all the executives still on board, it was a bit of a challenge, but overall we all have been hugely amazed how good it all worked, and there had been a lot of advantages which could have been discussed in during the break while doing teaching actually executive on a Zoom base, what most did. And also some had been a bit horrified by home office. Maybe that I did 10 years ago a study for the Swiss government on the social costs of mobility, and we checked a bit out what would it mean with home office. And I updated the whole home office issue right now. We today in year 2020, we would have in Switzerland 61 minutes commuting every day, which is 400 50,000 hours per week, which we use rather inefficiently for commuting activities mostly in cars, but also in public transports. For Switzerland, we did that check 10 years ago. What would happen if only 20% of all knowledge workers, 50% of Swiss employees are considered as knowledge workers. These are 510,000 employees today, would only work 1 day home office per week. 10 years ago, when I introduced that concept, it became a big resistance. Insurance company, financial companies, I mean, knowledge worker industries actually resisted and said, well, that is not really possible because, you know, we can't lead the people. What are they doing? They might be barbecuing always on Friday. So it's actually one factor, one additional vacation day. A lot of mistrust has been there. But we asked the question, what would that do? And actually, in terms of the climate change, which will be our next challenge after we overcome the post-COVID, in the post-COVID world, in Switzerland alone, only if 20% would do that, one home office day per week, only one per week. We experienced 3 months actually nearly be fully at home. It would be a CO2 reduction of 115,800 tons per year only in Switzerland, and if only 1/5 of the knowledge worker would stay 1 day at home. What does it mean? We need to do that. There's sufficient infrastructure, clear communication rules, especially leadership has to be much more results oriented in terms of management, and it's extremely important that trust is there. I'm very much convinced what stays as an organizational innovation, actually, it is the kind of new work where we work anytime, anywhere, and also a bit more borderless as a knowledge worker. As Peter Drucker already announced it very early, and we discussed a lot about it. I think now it's time that a lot is going to reality. However, home office still has certain disadvantages, and I think it makes sense to look back to Tom Allen's famous work of the late 70s, 77, the flow of technology and flow of knowledge, where he clearly looked at the probability of communication between two R&D people is dependent actually on the distance. So there's a logarithmic function, and the biggest thing is actually around 30 meters. With model information communication technology, the whole Allen curve shifts a bit, but it's still valid because communication research has shown that the probability of communication still depends, the frequency of communication still depends with meters. Also the communication you have with email, which means the closer you are, the stronger you communicate with your office neighbor. You have the most intense email communication context. That's what shows actually communication research. So the distance, physical distance, which is right now quite an important stuff. And I would like to encourage everybody to look a bit into the literature of virtual teams. We had done a lot in the 90s. That was the time, early 90s, when I did my PhD. So I'm quite in the literature of virtual R&D teams. And there's a lot had been actually done, and a lot built up on the famous work of Tom Allen at MIT. I think for us as researchers, we have actually challenged also what that does change for us in the company, if I take a company perspective. And I think we need, for the whole COVID crisis, distinguish between the losers, the winners, and short-term and long-term. And I don't go into details on it, but I think a few industries will be short-term losers, like hospitality. There will be short-term winners, but really short-term, I think there's no change in consumer behavior. There will be a long-term change in terms of retail. They will be the losers. We have since many years at our institute the Amazon Dominance Index, which means how much of the percentage of the market share is actually concentrated with Amazon. That actually is quite is quite huge, and there will be a loser, a winner actually long term, and that will be all the platforms. I just took Zoom, which had the biggest takeoff, but I think also WebEx, Teams, and all the others will be winners. For us, it's important, the short term actually, how to survive today. In the long term, where lies our future? Shortly to address the short term today, actually, huge things has been done. Textile companies produce masks, online degustation of very traditional industries like winemakers, or the rent-a-dog business in Spain, where you have been not allowed to go out without the dog. You know, this encourages all, this is all a bit of a, this is all a bit of a frugal innovation, an agile innovation, which is pragmatic, lean, cost-effective, and thinking actually in sprints. We did previously a lot of research on frugal innovation. I think if we look back to the 3 months or maybe to the half year, right now we will see a lot of frugal innovation. On the other hand, the long term is important. What is, what stays, what will be? And that will be digitalization, localization, and the mix of an on-off mix. Frank Piller will talk afterwards and about the avatars, and I looked a bit into esports, and that's amazing what happened, because we need as a substitute to the sports. Esports has been actually accelerated. Virtual runs had been done. E-commerce is here to stay. Additive manufacturing methods will be at the start of the increase, and the platforms actually that will be stay there. So everything where kind of a distance is required stays there. Overall, we could say crisis always lead to a trend enforcement, very seldom to a trend reversal. So that is quite an important thing to remark, because I think everything is turning upside down. I don't believe in that. I think overall a few trends will be enforced stronger than others. The rise of Amazon has been actually there if you look to the last 15 years, so it's not something totally new. I checked a lot with the analysis on business models in the post-COVID world. We did, together with our BMI lab, developed a bit of a procedure, analyze today's business model as first stage, then go secondly to update actually the business ecosystem, develop scenarios for the long-term development. What will be actually the winners? What will be the losers for in the post-COVID world? Then analyze the impact on your business model, identify new opportunities, and develop a clear, and I think that's very important, a clear vision where also the employees can actually can hold themselves actually for the post-COVID world, and develop then the roadmap to do so. We updated, I would like to remind you to our Peter nicely mentioned it, to the business model navigator. We actually have a virtual tool. It's totally free, totally open. You don't need to leave anything back. We put the whole business model navigator book actually virtually as an interactive tool on businessmodelnavigator.com. You could play around. A lot of the communities played around since we introduced it newly. The Business Model Navigator comes out in the second edition, where we, and that's what I would like to summarize a bit. You need first to analyze the ecosystem. What are the actors? What are the change drivers? And the change driver at the moment can be updated with the COVID crisis, that everything which requires physical distance, everything which addresses actually maybe in some areas too fragile supply chains needs actually to be addressed, and change driver in terms of collaboration and ecosystems actually are crucial change drivers. Secondly, generate new ideas. I encourage you, just play around with the businessmodelnavigator.com on the new patterns. We had 55 patterns, now we added 5 more on it, and play a bit around. What would that impact if your company would run after these patterns, because it is, trends will be enforced, not totally reversed. Check then again your consistency with the 4 questions on who's actually the target customer, what is the value proposition, how is the supply chain architecture affected, and what is the change on the revenue model. There needs to be a consistency in the story, how to create value and how to capture value. And what we put much more emphasis now in the second edition is actually on the testing. We developed also, identified a few testing methods which seem to be quite relevant to test it, to further develop the concept and to get to the hypothesis. Ladies and gentlemen, I come up with a very simple summary for the startup keynote. Societies will change. And I think we have to reflect what will remain also in the collective memory of our society. And deep crisis, and I think the COVID-19 was one of the deep psychologically, I don't address it as a health challenge, but psychologically as a deep crisis, will change, and there will be a strong effect, and that has an effect to innovation. New work modes will accelerate that. The learning process will be much more blended in future, and we need to think in business models. Innovation is overall more open, agile, digital and holistic. And my favorite slide, I borrowed from Daniel Borel. Daniel Borel was the founder of Logitech. He always came, was a Swiss guy, he always came once per year to my lecture. Once still he was a chairman, he always ended up with that slide. Think big, start small, fail cheap, and move fast. Thanks very much. And I'm open right now for some questions and try to keep the time. Peter.
Oliver, thanks a million. Now, I'm sure you can imagine a virtual round of enthusiastic applause there. Thanks for sharing your insights and showing the context and giving us some ideas about how to plan for the future. A couple of questions. So we have about 7 minutes, so your timing is perfect. The first one is, yes, what do you think the firm of tomorrow will look like?
Oh, the firm of tomorrow. That's a good question. I think we will be more fragmented, we'll be more open. The dynamic capabilities we have been built up in many industries towards actually more openness. And we started with Hank Jasper, who was also talking later on the open innovation issue, that companies will be more open, more collaborative, but in future it will be more focused towards the customer journey in terms of collaborative approaches, how we create superior value proposition for the companies. That will be actually that will be a crucial part. And yeah, I think it will be more flexible because also the digital interfaces, the APIs, that's what we saw in the financial industry. It opens up, it's standardized, that enables a lot of startups to entry, and that actually put a lot of pressure to the existent dominant players actually to answer and to also to open up and to flexibilize their supply chains. So overall, a more dynamic world. Also, the internal world will be more VUCA, not just the external VUCA environment, but also it will be a bit more reflected to our own organizations. And we will need to find more complex answers, and the employees will need to be more trusted. So new management styles will approach, which will be more results-only environment.
Oliver, you mentioned...
Overall, I would say, read back Peter Drucker. I am a big fan of him because he had a lot of big ideas. I put it a bit abstract, but I think a lot of that will happen at the moment.
In your talk there, you suggested that the COVID crisis is either amplifying some structural weaknesses in firms, or or else it's accelerating the move to certain digital environments. What do you think is going to move totally into your maybe sustainable winners, your Zoom top right-hand box? What do you think will be accelerated to totally online and will not reverse the trend after post-COVID?
Well, the problem is always humans, we are lazy and we are slow and we like to stay with the old stuff. And whenever we are forced into a new stuff, then it's something we experience the positive, and then we might stay there. So for example, online shopping, there are new product categories where during the last 3 months, we have been forced a bit in terms of do the online shopping. In all those categories won't go back. In all those who started first to teach once Zoom or with any other platform, I think there will be some advantages. What we realize, hey, right now I have all the names. I have now all the names, and with 200 students, sometimes it's difficult to get some. So if I start with a few cold calls and I take them by the first name, and they're surprised because at the beginning they thought, "Hey, this is only this is like a TV. I'm just consuming it." Now you force actually interaction. You see, these are actually things which are here to stay. So overall, all interaction, all virtualization. I think also in the future, there might be a small revival of the additive manufacturing methods and the business models which get around it, because it will also support us to overcome a bit the fragility of certain supply chains, where we saw right now in a few nations that this became, we are quite vulnerable. So everything which is digital, and again, this is not a new trend. This is a trend enforcement acceleration. This is not a trend reversal. Will accelerate it.
Okay, so you think that those people looking at their business model should look at the digital element of it and try and accelerate that transition?
And the blended part of it, the on-off mode. I think the biggest will be always the on-off. So it's also like Amazon did not, I mean, they started physical shops again. Why? Because it's the on-off, it's the experience. And you need it once, maybe you need it in a few shop stores, but that is actually the mix. The meetings, we all long actually until to the time where we all meet again, because it's also about trust, and we are chemical animals. So we smell and we feel, and really trust is actually also in the physical part. And if I take the Tom Allen curve, it's like a half-time of trust. So we build that trust, and it helps us for a certain time. And after we met, it still works. You need to reinforce and rebuild actually that trust again. And so anything where there's a mixture between the real life, the physical life, and the digital. So it will be I do not believe that we are going into the second life again. That was once a hype, and I don't think that this will be there. However, there will be a more blended way of bringing the whole stuff back, but more in a blended way.
Well, Oliver, we have just run out of time. So on behalf of the almost 200 delegates and the rest of the 600 at ISPIM, thank you so much for sharing your insights with you. And I look forward to coming across you at various other times in the conference. But thank you so much for your insight this morning.
Peter, thanks very much. And to everybody, thanks a lot. And let's stay in touch.